Today I'm talking about and reviewing Chasing Shadows, the first book in the Secret Machine series by Tom DeLonge and A.J. Hartley. So I was excited to read this, but also a little nervous, and for the same reason, because I learned about these books by being familiar with Tom DeLonge through his music, but I was also really hoping that I would enjoy it, because whenever I'm familiar with an author from something else, then I hope that I will enjoy their book, but I don't know if I will. But I wanted to support it, and I wanted to give it a try, and especially because this book is pretty large, it's about 650 pages, so if I ended up not liking it, then it would have felt like a very long book to get through, and there would have just been so much, and I really wouldn't have enjoyed it. So it was, understandably, a little intimidating. Another reason why I was a bit intimidated is this book has a few different genres. I'll talk more about the others later, but I'd say it's primarily science fiction. And that was a little intimidating to me because science fiction is a genre that I'm currently still trying to get into and enjoy more. I've not, never been able to enjoy a science fiction book or movie, but a lot of the time so far when I've read or watched something of that genre, it's common for me to find it boring, confusing, and overall just not enjoyable. But I'm happy to explore more of it with books like this one, especially when it is by someone who I'm already familiar with from something else, and I can see that it is something that is important to them. So that makes me more likely to want to check it out instead of it just being some random book by someone I'm not familiar with. I was sure that there were good science fiction books out there. I just needed to find the right ones, and I plan on reading more. The UFO/UAP phenomenon and stuff to do with aliens was a topic I'd heard about before but didn't know very much about, but after a while I became more open to trying this out. So this is a novel, this is a fictional story, but according to the book and the authors, it is based on real events. I don't know which exact parts are just fiction or if everything in here is true and there were just some names and stuff changed, but I think the fact that it's based on real events is part of what makes it so interesting. I really like this concept of using story based on actual events to express some kind of message that you believe in. While I think that's an interesting concept, it could be executed poorly. I was worried that maybe the characters would feel like shallow, one-dimensional characters with no development or personalities that were just thrown in there so that this could be called a story. But after reading it, I didn't feel that way. I wanted to try this book out, and I'm always willing to hear people out and see what they have to say. This is science fiction, but it's also a bit of a thriller and historical fiction as well. The historical fiction aspect of it is mostly about World War II, as there are multiple character perspectives in this book, and one of them takes place during that time. More about the different characters later. But besides the main four perspectives that this book alternates between, there are a few others that don't come up as often. Most of these would be called what are called interludes, which are individual chapters that are from an entirely different character's perspective. That chapter does its thing, and then we just don't see them again, because that's all that character had to offer us for the story. Those characters aren't always related to the main story, but the interludes are all related to the main overall topic that the book is about. So they're not just filler, not at all. They're basically little mini-stories in between that offer even more perspectives about this topic. Interludes can be identified because the text has a different font. Some of the interludes in this series are another part of how this is part historical fiction. One of the interludes is actually one of the author, A.J. Hartley's story of a personal encounter he had in the 80s in Japan, but it's written as if it's fiction and part of the story. And there were also some chapters that weren't exactly interludes, but they'd be from one of the characters from the main story, and then we'd just see them once and not again. Those were interesting as well. These chapters, plus all the main perspectives, can take place anywhere from the 1940s to present day. Well, present day in this book being the 2010s. This book was published in 2016. I've had so much to say about it already without even really getting into the main story, but that's just because this book is large and there's so much to it. Now I'm going to try to get into explaining the main characters of this book and what the main plot of this book is. So there are four main character perspectives that this book alternates between. The first is Alan, a US military pilot who, at the beginning, is stationed in Afghanistan where he encounters what we as the reader know as some kind of UFO. It's something that he can't explain and he gets in trouble for not being able to defend against it. Then he gets taken to and offered a job at Area 51 in Nevada, which becomes his new life. He's still a pilot there, and he learns stuff and is used for tests. I don't want to say too much, but that is basically his story in the book. The second main perspective is from an English woman named Jennifer. She is basically a sort of activist who travels a lot and works on causes that mean something to her. Her father is a very wealthy businessman, but she's grown apart from him over the years because she doesn't really agree with what he has done with his businesses and what he uses his money for. She's got a very strong sense of justice. However, that money from her father is what's funding all her trips and activism, so there's even more tension there because she doesn't like where the money is coming from, but at the same time, she's able to use it to do what's important to her. When her father unexpectedly passes away under suspicious circumstances, she goes back to England and she has to take care of everything there because he left her practically everything in his will, his money and business ventures, which is a world that she is not only not very knowledgeable about or familiar with it, but she's also not very fond of it. The third perspective is a woman named Tamika who lives in New York. She is a web journalist who runs a site called Debunction. Basically, she goes over conspiracy theories and debunks them. She's not the kind of person to believe in them. The fourth main perspective is a bit different from the others because all the others take place in the present or near the present. This one takes place starting in 1939 and it goes on until 1947. This perspective belongs to a young Polish man, well, really, teenager, named Jerzy. He and his brother and parents were taken by the Nazis, though they were separated from their parents. So Jerzy and his brother go to the Wenceslas mine, I don't know how that's pronounced, and they work for the Nazis against their will, of course. Jerzy's perspective is in the form of a journal that he wrote and sent to Tamika. I really enjoyed Jerzy's perspective. It helped me learn more about World War II. Getting a perspective of someone who was in it. I definitely learned a lot from reading this, and not just about World War II. I think I enjoyed Jerzy's point of view the most. I liked them all, but his story was really interesting. It may have felt more personal, with it being in first person and a personal journal entry, but I also just think that his story was really fascinating, and definitely the most emotionally charged of the four. These multiple perspectives are part of why this book is so big. And throughout it, each of these characters have different things that they're working on or trying to figure out. For some of them, there are people who don't want them to know certain things, so they're getting chased and traveling to different places. It's pretty high stakes. There are a bunch of different unsolved situations and mysteries that they're trying to get answers to, like with Jennifer, for example. She wants to find out why her father really died, not believing what she was told about his death, and she wants to know what exactly happened there. What had he been working on that led to what she believed was someone killing him? With Tamika, she's trying to evade the people who are, for whatever reason, trying to track her down and kill her, as well as make sense of some of the things in Jerzy's journal because she doesn't know if she believes it or if it's just some crazy old man rambling about something. With Alan, he's not really fully told by the people he's now working for and living with what exactly he's doing or why, but they can't tell him everything. And Jerzy's perspective is all in the past, so it's not really the same with him. This book offers all these perspectives, plus the interludes and other chapters like I mentioned, to introduce some concepts about what this book is overall about. I think that for what the authors were trying to achieve, this was a good way to do that. Considering that they wanted to introduce and explain these concepts with a story, this absolutely could have been a jumbled mess of boring info dumps, lifeless characters, and messy and confusing storylines. But that's not what this is. I think this was done very well. It was an enjoyable reading experience, and it didn't feel too complicated for me to understand. That was one of the things I was worried about going into it. I was like, this is a large book that's probably going to be about large, complicated things that I'm not going to understand, but it didn't really feel that way. I think the authors knew that some of these things might be hard to understand. They wanted to introduce these concepts to people little by little, one step at a time, and I think that with the way this book is formatted and written, they did a good job with it. I think that would have been hard to achieve. Organizing a bunch of thoughts and ideas can be very difficult, but I think that they achieved this well. I think they did well with organizing everything and compiling it into a whole novel that is not only informational, eye-opening, and insightful, but also enjoyable. About it being easy to follow along with, there were a lot of terms about things like planes, weapons, and business. I heard some terms that reminded me of my physics class in 9th grade, which was not something that I understood super well. But I didn't feel like I had to understand all of what those words and terms meant to understand the story and what was happening. They were just written in a way where I could understand what was happening in general, and I'm like, okay, that's a part of the plane, that's a certain thing they're doing, I get it. I thought this book was really interesting. It was cool to, as the reader, have access to all these different perspectives and to follow alongside these characters as they traveled, learned, evaded and tried to figure everything out. The mystery and conspiracy aspect of it is definitely very interesting, so overall, I really enjoyed it. Now, I'll say some other things I liked about this book. The text isn't super small, it's actually kind of big. That was a huge relief to me, and even 100 pages in, I still felt relieved and felt like the book would take so much shorter to read than I was originally expecting. You can see it's actually kind of big. So, it definitely could have been smaller for a book this size, but it's not super small. I like that each chapter says where that chapter takes place, and also the year that it takes place. And there are a lot of different locations throughout this book, so that's very helpful. As someone who finds geography and learning about other places pretty interesting, that was something I enjoyed about this. I think the authors did a good job at keeping everything organized. I enjoyed all the different locations, how this book is just all over the place, but not in a way where it's impossible to understand and I just felt lost, because I didn't feel that way. Multiple perspectives from different locations can add to the experience of making you want to keep reading, because you have to read through the other perspectives first to get to the other ones. But while you're reading those other perspectives, you become more invested in what's going on with them because more stuff happens. I thought the pacing was pretty good. It's a large book, but I think the pacing is pretty fast. So it stays entertaining, and there's a lot going on in it, but I also don't think that it felt too fast. I didn't feel like a bunch of exciting stuff happened just to happen or to get a point across. It doesn't feel like something that existed just to present a bunch of ideas or facts. It feels like a story, and it's an entertaining, enjoyable story too. The chapters are often short, especially towards the end, as there are things that are happening fast and things are becoming connected. The chapters typically weren't very long, so it was the kind of thing where if you want, you could just read a little bit at once, or a bunch of small chapters at once. I think the authors knew that this story and subject matter was intimidating, but they approached it and executed it very well, making it digestible and enjoyable for the reader. There were always things going on, so many plots going on at once, so there was definitely a lot to be invested in, and there were so many questions, so despite how long this book is, I guess it didn't really feel that long to me. There were some moments that I really enjoyed that were very thrilling or exciting, especially towards the end. Those moments, however, I will not mention in this video. I also enjoyed seeing how everything sort of becomes connected near the end. I won't say too much about that either. Overall, I enjoyed this. I thought it was pretty good. I'm glad that I read it. I'm grateful that I got to learn a lot through it, and that this book helped me learn more about the specific topic that it's about, and that it helped me enjoy science fiction a little more, showing me that it is possible for me. It looks like a lot, and it kind of is, but again, I think this concept, which could be very complicated, was executed very well. Like, I didn't think there were too many perspectives. I thought it was a good amount, and I think that everything else with it was done pretty well also. My next review will be of the sequel, A Fire Within, which I started reading very shortly after finishing Chasing Shadows because I was really invested and wanted to start reading it right away.